The history of Lake Bluff is a great example of the American experience, paralleling what was happening in the United States in the 1800s and 1900s. Shown here is a 1926 mural in East School depicting the French explorers Marquette and Joliet landing on the bluffs of what we now call Lake Bluff. The early 1700s cross on the right-hand side was found embedded in a tree cut down on Green Bay Road in the 1890s. The Potawatomi Indian tribe inhabited northern Illinois until the Chicago Treaty of 1833 forced them to move west of the Mississippi. They had used the Lake Bluff ravines to hold their tribal meetings using trail trees to mark the way. Early settlers to Illinois, following the westward expansion begun by the Lewis and Clark expedition of 1803 and 4, used the old Potawatomi trails and military roads, such as the Green Bay Road Trail, to explore and settle the area. In 1836, John and Catherine Close, originally from Germany and attracted by the cheap land prices here, $1.25 an acre, purchased 100 acres along the lakefront up to Green Bay Road, where Close built his blacksmith and gun shop. In 1850, John Close left for the gold rush in California, never to return home, leaving his wife and 7 children behind. As the building of the railroads changed America, it also greatly impacted the Lake Bluff area, then known as Rockland, connecting it to the markets and travelers of Chicago and later Milwaukee. Catherine Close and another resident built the first flourishing business, a brickyard, which lasted until the beginning of the 20th century, supplying bricks to the surrounding communities. After the Civil War, where our community sent 8 men to join the Union Army and 4 died before it ended, the Rockland Union Church, forerunner of the current Union Church, was established in 1866. It was torn down in 1899 to make way for the electric railroad line to Libertyville. In 1869, the first school was opened opposite the Rockland Union Church. Prior to that, local school children attended school in either Lake Forest or North Chicago. In 1911, the building was moved to Roundout, where it became a church and later a home. It is still there. This circa 1900 photo shows the Hoffman Farm and Farmhouse, which was built in 1877 along Green Bay Road and is still standing now on West Washington. The farm was adjacent to the Dwyer Stagecoach Stop and Tavern. William and Mary Dwyer, along with her brother, Dr. Richard Murphy, came in 1837, and soon their establishment became the social hub of the little community. With the rise of the Industrial Revolution and a growing middle class in America, the use of leisure time became an important priority to families. In 1875, a group of Methodist laymen and ministers purchased 125 acres from the Close family and founded the Lake Bluff Camp Meeting Association, which was modeled after similar communities in Oak Bluff, Massachusetts and Chautauqua, New York. Designed to promote not only religious worship, but also educational, recreational, and social and cultural activities, the Chautauqua and Camp Meeting offered lots of opportunities for the residents. Streets were laid out fronted by 25-foot lots. A large wooden tabernacle or assembly hall was built in 1883 on the south side of East Prospect, now the site of the current Union Church, replacing an earlier tent. It held up to 2,500 people, and many of the camp meeting events took place there. By the 1890s, there were over 30 hotels and boarding houses available for the over 5,000 people who visited every summer. The first was the Lake Bluff Hotel, later known as the Bluff Lodge, which was erected in 1876 on the southeast corner of Prospect and Moffett. It had over 50 rooms. These following slides show the Forest Inn, the Hotel Minnetonka, and the Colonial Hotel. The Colonial Hotel faced a ravine on what is now Sylvan Lane, built around 1880, and it was torn down in the 1930s. The greatest of all the summer hotels was the Hotel Irving, built in 1883 across from the Tabernacle. With accommodations for over 500, it was 5 stories, had shops, arcades, a ballroom, tennis courts, and a bowling alley. Tents and equipment could be rented by summer campers who could then pitch their tents on the bluff overlooking Lake Michigan. They also could take the path, which is still in existence, down to the beach. People could purchase a summer home for $250 to be built in 20 days on these 25-foot lots. Many of the original homes on the east side of town were these summer cottages. Frances Willard, founder of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, spent her summers in Lake Bluff, and together with other avid temperance leaders like Mrs. Lucy Hayes, wife of the President of the United States, founded the National Prohibition Party here in 1881. Though less than 200 people lived here all year round, during the summer months thousands flocked to the village, attracted by the beaches, the ravines, and the numerous Chautauqua activities offered by the Camp Meeting Association. The younger members of the families who returned every summer took full advantage of the many recreational and natural resources of Lake Bluff, including the newly popular sport of tennis. The ravines provided cooler temperatures and lush shade to women who had to conform to the cumbersome and heavy fashions of the day. One recreational attraction was Artesian Lake, which was approximately 10 acres in size, stretching from the current Artesian Park up to Gazebo Park. Providing swimming, boating, and picnicking in the summer and ice skating during the winter months, it was a popular spot until it was drained in 1904. The Lake Bluff Country Club was built in 1897 on the southeast corner of Center and Moffett after the Hotel Irving burned. Its members benefit from its bowling alleys, its tennis courts, and the second-floor games and ballroom. It was open from April to October, and it soon became the social hub for the village. It was disbanded and torn down in the 1930s. In 1894, 6 homeless children from Chicago were brought to Lake Bluff and housed in a summer cottage. The next year, James and Marilla. The orphanage was eventually to house up to 200 children, and it has its own hospital, bakery, and for a while its own school. As the orphanage concept was phased out in the 1960s, the Lake Bluff campus was closed, and the buildings were torn down in 1979. The grounds were sold to developers. The orphanage was located in the 200 block of Scranton and North Avenues between Evanston and Glen. As the popularity of the camp meeting declined towards the beginning of the 20th century, Lake Bluff incorporated as a village in 1895 to be able to take on many of the services previously done by the Camp Meeting Association. As the village of Lake Bluff began to evolve in the early 1900s, certain landmarks still in existence were built. The train station in 1904 and the village hall in 1905 are probably the most prominent. Replacing the old one-room schoolhouse was a new 4-room brick building housing grades up to 8th grade. Additions were made in 1922 and then again after World War II. Since the 1880s, there has been a grocery store in the northwest corner of Scranton and Walnut. Originally a wooden structure operated by Rosenthal and Helming, it partially burned and was rebuilt around 1902 as a brick building, which is still used as a grocery store. The Merchants Block dated to the turn of the 20th century and housed a grocery, drugstore, real estate, and other offices on the second floor. It also housed the village offices until the village hall was erected in 1905. The Merchants Block burned in 1917. The north side of Scranton, in the days just before World War I, had a wooden sidewalk, which led past Helming's Grocery, the Little Post Office, which was presided over by Isabella Ross, postmistress and piano teacher, and a modest jewelry store. Several Chicago industrialists and businessmen, grown wealthy by the success of Chicago's industrial age, looked north up the shoreline to build their large, imposing summer homes in a halcyon time before the Great War. One of them was Harry and Bessie Clow residence, which was built in 1909. Clow was the president of Rand McNally, and he chose Benjamin Marshall, prominent Chicago architect who designed the home high on the bluffs and bordered by the ravines which led to the lake. Jens Jensen, Americans. The inclusion of the United States in World War I in 1917 brought a patriotic fervor not only to the country, but specifically to Lake Bluff. the village sent more men and raised more money than any town of our size, prompting the Chicago Tribune to declare Lake Bluff the most patriotic town in the United States. The residents also raised money to send an ambulance and local volunteer driver to France to help in the war effort. After the war, when Johnny came marching home, he found the village in the midst of a facelift. The boom years of the 1920s brought new brick buildings and businesses to the uptown area. Lake Bluff was on its way from shedding its small-town look to becoming a full-fledged North Shore suburb. In 1924, the village contracted with nationally known municipal planner Jacob Crane to develop a new look for Lake Bluff's business area. This sketch shows what is now the corner of Sheridan Road and Scranton Avenue was to look like. The crash of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression ended all plans for new development and expansion. These two views of a section of the Uptown Business District, one from 1928 and the other from 1938, shows that visually little has changed in the past 80 years. One of the reasons that in the year 2007, part of the business district was listed on the National Historic Register. The top view shows the site of the Lake Bluff Library from 1958 to 1975, when the current library was built. This modest structure was the home and business of Graham Munch's drugstore beginning in the 1930s. When he retired, he gave the first floor for the library while retaining his residence on the second floor. Artesian Park on the bottom was the former site of the town dump from 1920 until the 1930s, when it was turned over to the Park District. After the Second World War, the baby boom era with its population growth also reached Lake Bluff. New housing was begun in the 1950s, known as the North Terrace, and the 1960s brought the development of both the East and West Terraces, along with 3 new schools, the Junior High in 1955 and West School in Knollwood and Central School in the 1960s. Further residential development and annexation in the past 30 years has moved our village boundaries to 4 square miles and a population of just over 6,000. This museum is named for Elmer Vliet, resident of the village from 1927 until his death in 1998. Elmer started after World War I as a chemist with Dr. Abbott and retired in 1962 as chairman of the board of Abbott Laboratories. He served the village as a trustee, president of the village board, chairman of the zoning and planning boards, and a member of both the Lake Bluff School District 65 and Lake Forest High School District 115. For 50 years, Elmer collected and recorded the past and present history of the village, gave numerous talks to community and school groups, and provided the material and means to begin the Vliet Museum for Lake Bluff history.